so we'll stop at around 10:50. Okay. Welcome to another conversation on thin ice. This week we will be exploring issues surrounding the US and the US election. When America sneezes, Australia gets a cold. We saw this in the GFC in 2007. To help us navigate this topic, we have Sky News contributor, author and political party reformer John Ruddick, who wrote the book Make the Liberal Party Great Again. John, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Joel. Very nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Your commentary is phenomenal. I've been following your work. There's very few people, and I mean this honestly, there's very few people in Australia that I trust looking at the US. Often, I look at the things happening in the US and I'm like, maybe I'm wrong, I'm an outsider, I've never been there before, but I read your content and we are 100% following in lockstep, and it's phenomenal to watch and it's very affirming. But before we get into the conversation about the US election,
yes,
I heard recently that you've been announced for the CPAC conference as one of the speakers.
Looking forward to CPAC, absolutely.
Awesome. So
yes.
Look, I know I think they're mostly sold out, but I think there's still 100 tickets or so, guys. So make sure you grab them so you can meet people like John and have a chat about what's going on there.
Well, Joel, look, we want to make CPAC a institution for the Conservatives in Australia, and as it has been in the United States since the early 1970s. It was CPAC was originally started as the Ronald Reagan vehicle to become president. Okay, so to organise the conservative activists, which had been sort of disorganised prior to CPAC. So, and look, we had the CPAC last year in Australia, which was the inaugural Australian CPAC, and I think it was a huge success. So I'm very pleased to hear that it's been, a lot of people want to attend again this year.
Awesome. Now, look, I'm really looking forward to it. Now, let's get into a few topics, because there's a number of things I really want to cover and pick your brain apart, because as I said before, I'm finding very few people that, one, understand the issues going on there, and two, I can speak to in person on that from an Australian context, because it's all fine and well, eating popcorn and watching the US election, but we do eventually have to apply the same principles and lessons that the US have done and the UK have done as well. So we had a couple of presidential debates and vice presidential debates that we've seen. A couple of weeks ago, we saw Donald Trump face head-to-head with Joe Biden. What are your thoughts on that one? And then after that, we'll talk about the VP debate.
Well, I'll tell you something interesting, Joel. If you want, the purpose of a national leaders debate is to win over voters. Okay, sounds very elementary, but okay. And the thing that wins over voters is not so much the content of the debate, it's the first 15 minutes of commentary immediately post the debate. So I like to watch the first 15 minutes on Fox News, and I like to watch the first 15 minutes on either MSNBC or CNN. Because regardless of what actually happened in the debate, it's what the expert class, the so-called expert class, it's what they say in those first few minutes after the debate is what the rest of the media, largely, rightly or wrongly, but if you're an undecided voter out there in Michigan, you're probably going to be influenced by what the people said about the debate. So, what did people say about the first debate? Well, I thought Trump did very well, but the consensus certainly was that Trump was too overbearing. I thought it was unfair because I thought Joe Biden was ruder than Trump was. But that's what happened. I think it was, look, last week, or 2 weeks ago now, was a bad week for the Trump campaign. We had a debate that was received, not great for Trump. Then we had his tax returns, which wasn't great. And then we had the COVID diagnosis. Again, we thought, he's in hospital. But then he had then he sort of, came back from the dead after 3 days. And he bounced back strongly. And so we haven't had that many polls since he made his impressive comeback. So we'll see what happens there. Yeah,
I really think that, on the debate, Joe Biden was actually the first to interrupt, so absolutely, I thought that was actually really bad. I did think Trump went for the jugular too much, and I get it. He hasn't been able to face off against someone one-on-one in 4 years, and he's copped all of this abuse. I think he'll pull it back a bit in the next election, just as Mike Pence, with the brilliant record of the Trump administration, he gunned it and he smashed it. And I think Trump can do a similar job. But with the with the COVID crisis that's been going on and what happened with Trump, I agree. We haven't seen a poll yet, but I suspect there's a lot of sympathy for him and what he went through, and the fact that he's come out and announced to seniors, to everyone, I'm making the same thing that I had free for you guys, because no one should be left alone. But what did you think about the vice presidential debate?
Well, look, Mike Pence is an underutilised asset in the Trump team because he is the perfect VP for Donald Trump, because where Trump is very charismatic and very sort of authentic and loud and obviously a larger-than-life personality, and he's a political novice, you've got Mike Pence, who's like, and Trump, of course, is a billionaire from New York, very brash. Mike Pence is a conservative evangelical Christian from the Midwest, from Indiana, okay, and he is a political professional. He's been involved. He's been in, I think he was the governor of Indiana, and he was in Washington DC as a congressman for I think 3 terms or something. So he really, and he never says a wrong thing. There's never any scandals about Mike Pence, and as we saw this week, he's pretty good on his feet.
Yeah,
he used to be, before politics, I think for a period he was a talkback radio host. Yeah. So you've got to be pretty good sort of thinking if you're in that type of a role.
Yeah.
So look, I on balance, I think Pence was much better than Kamala Harris. Now, but again, if we just go back to what the immediate narrative is afterwards, well, that was that Pence had done well. Yeah. Even the Sydney Morning Herald, their commentator a couple of hours later said, "Oh, well, I think Pence won that." Yeah. And so, look, I thought that was hopefully the sign of things turning around for the Trump campaign.
Kamala Harris and Joe Biden in the past, they've refused to answer any questions regarding stacking the courts and what's happening there. And this is very topical, as you know, because the recent death a couple of weeks ago, which is insane because it feels like it was months ago, the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yeah.
And for those of you that don't know, unlike Australia, the Supreme Court in the US is the highest court in the land, and they've got 9 Supreme Court justices on there, and one recently passed away, RGB. What are your thoughts in terms of RGB's death, the new appointment, Amy Coney Barrett, and also the possible implications of that appointment?
Okay, well, Trump, I have had a change of mind on this one. Trump is entirely constitutionally correct to seek to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg prior to the election. Yep. There is no doubt about it. Anybody who claims that he's doing something which is outside of the norms of what's happened in America about the Supreme Court nomination is simply ignorant. Trump is, when the president and the Senate majority are of the same party in an election year, they go and they fill a vacancy in the Supreme Court. That said, I believe what Trump should have done when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, Trump should have said, we're going to deal with this after the next president, the winner of this presidential election is going to fill this position. Okay. Now, I'll tell you what would have happened there. Now, Conservatives would have been upset about that to some extent. But what Trump would have been doing is he would have been making this presidential election a referendum on who gets control of the Supreme Court. Now, so there still will be some people in America who are conservative-minded people and who do care about the Supreme Court, but for whatever reasons don't like Donald Trump. Okay, they don't like his personality, they don't like his tweets, all meaningless stuff, but they're not that. Now, but if Trump had made this election a referendum, because at the moment this election is a referendum on Trump. Biden's not even really an important part of it. It's just a yes or no on Trump. I think Trump had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to say, look, we're not going to fill this Supreme Court nomination till early next year when the new president, or hopefully it'll be him, is sworn in. And then that would have made this election all about the Supreme Court, not just all about Trump. It would have been about the Supreme Court, and I think that would have helped Trump get elected. Now, people might say, well, the Supreme Court's more important than any presidency. Okay, and that may be true because a Supreme Court justice is, a lifetime appointment. But the Democrats have already told us that if they win, that they're going to, they have almost told us, and I think we can pretty much put it in the bank, that they're going to pack the court. They're going to add more justices to the Supreme Court. So, that's why I believe Trump, They should have, look, it was Mitch McConnell's decision more than Trump's decision. Mitch McConnell, after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, would have rung up Trump and said, Mr. President, we absolutely must fulfill this nomination before this first term. And Trump would have gone along with it. I think that was an error.
Yeah, no, look, I mostly agree with that, and I think it would put it pretty much in the bag for him. The only problem I see with that, though, and it leads very well in our next topic, is the mail-in voting. If there's any disputes with that, I'm really worried about the way that could go. I mean, I'll quickly introduce. You were recently appeared on the ABC's Q&A, the most beloved conservative show in Australia.
Yes.
And of course, I'm being sarcastic, guys. It's a terrible show. There were some American-speaking commentators there who I don't know what their credibility to talk on these topics are, but it's zilch if it has anything to do with mail-in voting. Because I wrote an article a couple months ago. I've been following a young man named Tim Pool in the USA. He's not that young. He's actually 30, 35. And he's covered this for months now. The Democrats have been pushing universal mail-in voting, and it's terrible. Now, let me give you guys a quick education on this. Universal mail-in voting and absentee mail-in voting are two very different things. Trump voted by absentee mail-in voting during the primaries early this year when he was voting for a Republican. Absentee mail-in voting is where you say to the Electoral College or to the people conducting the election, I want you to send me a ballot. I won't be able to make it on the election. Please send it to me. And then it's the message is sent and you receive a ballot directly to your house. Other people don't know if you're going to get it. Universal mail-in balloting is where the government in a state, and often this is a governor that makes the decision, will come out and say, we're going to have universal mail-in ballot, where every registered person will receive a ballot to vote on. Now, you can obviously see some problems with this. What's that going to do? What's that going to stop people from voting twice? They'll vote by mail-in ballot and then in person. What if their signature's wrong? Are there going to be higher, fault rates with it? Are they going to get rid of it? So this topic came up in the debate on the Q&A on the ABC, and one of the commentators came out and said there is no evidence that mail-in balloting is fraudulent, or there's a risk of it damaging democracy. Do you see the sleight of hand in those words? She said mail-in voting. She didn't even distinguish between the two. See, there's nothing wrong with absentee mail-in voting. As I said, Trump did it before in the primary. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look through some of the stats on this. Sure. Because, John, you were 100% right on that show, yet anyone watching would have thought you were being lambasted, you're completely wrong, you don't know what you're talking about, you're a red hat wearing hillbilly in Australia that just wants Trump to come in, which is completely wrong. And I'm going to tag this interview for you guys to see on the ABC so you can see how wrong they were.
That there's anything wrong or fraudulent with mail-in balloting.
So we're going to start with this quote from 2012 from the New York Times. This will be the only time you hear me cite the New York Times. Votes cast by mail are less likely to be counted, more likely to be compromised, and more likely to be contested than those cast in a voting booth, statistics show. Election officials rejected almost 2% of ballots cast by mail-in ballots, double the rate of in-person voting. Now, Democrats have been pushing mail-in ballots, and this is the result. So for those of you who don't know, in the US, it's unlike the Australian system. You have primaries early on in the year for the Democrat nominee and the Republican nominee, and then you've got the presidential election on November 3rd this year. So NPR, which is a news outlet, did some analysis in the US, and they found that of the millions of people that voted in the US election, 550,000 ballots were disqualified for a number of reasons, including fraud, the signatures not lining up, a bunch of different issues. And that doesn't even get us into the ballot harvesting, which is a completely different issue. Now, who were these voters? Well, disproportionately, for example, in North Carolina, let's get very specific. These voters were early voters, new voters, black voters, minority voters. That's, in fact, black voters, in their case, they were rejected up to 5 times more than usual. And just so if you guys don't know, black voters in the US are more predominantly vote for Democrats. So that's going to hurt Democrats more than Trump, even though I think Trump will see a bigger black vote this year. But it's only like 15%. The Democrats are getting like 50+% of the black vote. So let's come to you, John. I need your guidance on this. Why are they ignorant? Are they just, do they not know the facts? Or are they being malicious in this case?
Okay, well, so I have been in and around the New South Wales Liberal Party for about 25 years. And it's been well publicised that there's a lot of factional internal corruption in the New South Wales Liberal Party. I think it's getting a little bit better now. But Joel, that factional corruption was all built on ballots mailed out to people. Because what happens is, let's say you get a vote in something internal election, someone will come round, some factional boss will ring you up and say, hey, Joel, look, you're part of our group. If you want to remain part of our group, you've got to sign your ballot paper and just hand it over to me and I'll vote for you. And that's what's happened, countless times. And that has propped up the corruption within the party. Now, what's happening, what the Democrats want to do in America is that on a massive worldwide scale, on the American stage. So there is no question that what you're saying is correct. The absentee ballots are completely fine. The universal mail-out ballots are completely, massively open to corruption because let's say you've got a inner city place in America with a very high amount of poverty and crime and destitution. And for whatever reason, there are places like that in America. And all those people will be, in one way or another, getting a government benefit. So if you're getting a government benefit, the government knows your name and your address. So but most of those people in that inner city hellhole aren't going to be particularly interested in politics, are they?
No.
They're going to be thinking about something that's going on in the hood that day.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so what's going to happen is every one of those welfare recipients, along with everybody else in the state, is going to get a ballot paper. Do you want to vote for Biden or Trump? Now, most of them aren't going to care, but there's going to be some activists in there, and they won't be pro-Trump activists, they'll be Democratic activists, and they were going to walk around that place, and they're going to say, hey, everyone, sign your ballot paper, hand it over to us, and we'll give you $5.
Yeah.
Now, is that going to happen? I'm absolutely certain it's going to happen, Joel.
Yeah.
But I'm not losing sleep over universal ballots.
Okay.
In this election. I'll tell you why. And you may know more about this than me.
Maybe.
But I looked into it a few weeks ago, and I think that there's only 9 states out of 50 doing the universal mail-out ballot.
Yeah.
And they normally, they're really hardcore Democratic states anyway, California and Illinois, I think. And the only one that I think that is a battleground is Nevada.
Yeah.
But I mean, is that your understanding?
This is my understanding so far. So I wrote this article in mid-August, and it's my understanding that a lot of these states have changed. So where it says ballots are mailed, that's the equivalent of universal mail-in ballot.
Okay.
So you're right, there are a few states. I suspect it's more now. The absentee ballots that are allowed are all the blue states, and where an excuse is required, it's all the orange states. So that sort of really clearly shows that this is definitely going to be the highest level of mail-in ballots we've ever seen in an election in the US. Now, I've heard a lot of different numbers. You guys need to please fact check me on this, but I was sitting down with John before, and he pretty much said he thinks it's about 30 million in terms of the amount of people voting by ballot. I've heard something upwards of 80 million.
Actually, you're probably right. Well, I think at the last US election, I think there was about 140,000 votes cast. Yeah. And I would say that, you're going to have probably at least half will be not in person this year.
Yeah. So with the Democratic Party, they've really been pushing this, and it's sort of backfired recently because I don't know why they're realising this now, because I've been saying it forever. And if an Australian 23-year-old can work this out, I don't know why they can't with the establishment they've got. That mail-in ballots, they will get disqualified, and because Republicans have been pushing in-person voting, it's going to work very much in their favour.
That's a good point.
And I think they know this because they've started pushing out the narrative of what I don't even know what this word means, a red mirage. And the idea is that on election day, or November 4th for us, in-person voting, Trump will win in a landslide. I think maybe even a 49-state landslide, but we'll see. And then after that, just like in 2018, and I write this in my article, week will go after week, and every day they will be finding new ballots, 80,000 here, 80,000 there. In 2018, they found some a stack in someone's car, a stack under a desk here, and next thing you know, it's no longer a red wave, it's a blue wave, a slow blue wave that we're calling it. I'm very worried about it, and if there's any disputes, I know that the Supreme Court's going to have to break it. So look, I'm thinking 80 million people. Just so you guys know, about 160 million voted last time in the 2016 election. And in terms of, just to put this in perspective, Trump won the last election by winning the Rust Belt with 80,000 votes. That's what it came down to, the skin of his teeth. He didn't win the popular vote by 4 million votes or something. So this is a massive issue, and that's why that's what changed my mind on the situation on the Supreme Court. So you simply cannot have one of the swing vote justice being very unreliable to conservatives. You need to secure that. Otherwise, we're going to have a constitutional crisis like we did in was it 2001 with
2000 with Bush and Gore.
Yeah.
I think what will happen is if they get to about January the 20th, which is when you're meant to have the inauguration of the next president.
Yeah.
Then the Constitution actually says that it's decided by the House of Representatives.
That's right.
This is what Bush versus Gore should not have been decided by the Supreme Court. It should have been decided by the House of Representatives. That's what the Constitution says. And that's what I think will happen this time if there is a dispute.
Yeah.
And if it goes to the House of Representatives, Joel, it means Trump's won. Because
Maybe.
No, because even if the Democrats retain control of the House, there's 435 members of the House of Representatives.
Yep.
But if there's a dispute about who's going to be the president, all those states get to vote as one block. They get one vote. So California gets one vote, Montana gets one vote, Vermont gets one vote, South Carolina gets one vote. So that's what, and there's just more states with more Republican congressmen than there are Democrats. Now so in a state like, in some of the very big states, there's an overwhelming number of Democrats, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So I think people, before a hard-fought election, people often say, oh, well, it's going to be disputed afterwards. Very often that's not the case. Yeah. Very often there will be a clear-cut result, and I think that's what the case will be.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the concept of the House of Representatives sort of working it out with the delegations that go.
Right.
However, that is assuming that the Republicans don't lose that hold. That's the problem. And that's where I'm like, okay, what happens I think it was a couple hundred years ago or something, they had a situation where they had to decide it that way, and they almost had a constitutional crisis, but they worked it out. They were the ones that worked it out. It wasn't the Supreme Court. So there might be something there.
Yes.
However, it is good to know, even because how many unconstitutional things have happened, and it's gone to here or there. You want to have all bases covered. Otherwise, we're going to end up with an impeachment situation, which is, Trump was impeached on completely the wrong definition of impeachment, yet he was impeached nonetheless, and that never goes away. But look, I don't know if you have any final thoughts on that, but look, I've been very concerned about that, and that's something where I've said that it could trigger the civil war, and we might end up maybe even with the President Nancy Pelosi if we get to January 20th, which is the cutoff date, according to the Constitution, in terms of there has to be a new president. And the problem is, and I write this in my article, the problem is the way it works is it may not be the President pro tempore that takes Trump's place. It might be Nancy Pelosi if she's re-elected. If they count her votes before they can't count Trump's votes, we might be in a very bad situation for the Durham investigation. And
well, that's right. Yeah, there's so much hinges on who wins this election. But and I think this is why the left is fighting so hard, because I think that there will be some people in the Obama administration which will end up in jail if Trump gets re-elected. So this is why they are fighting so hard.
Yep.
But look, I think if it only goes to the House of Representatives if the Electoral College has not been able to meet and come up with 269 votes for either Trump or Biden. Then it goes to the House of Representatives. If that happens, Trump wins. So, but look, last point on the mail-out ballots or absentee ballots, the whole lot. I don't like any of it. Okay, I really think people should vote on election day. Okay, we should have a campaign, which should be a battle of ideas, and you really don't vote until election day. I'm sorry, it's an important responsibility.
Yep.
Now, what if you're in a wheelchair and you've got cancer and you can't get to the voting booth? Okay, well, in that situation, yes, request an absentee ballot, but you've got to have some pretty good evidence.
Yep.
I don't like it. It's open to corruption, and it is the left-wing parties all around the world pushing it the most, which, but the data you showed before, Joel, is very interesting. That absentee ballots have a high rate of disqualification, which of course would be the case. And so are they punishing themselves? I hadn't thought of that before, but it makes a lot of sense.
There was one case, I won't touch on too much, but there was one case where it was so bad in the primary that they had to throw the whole thing out and said, a judge threw it out and he said, we're redoing this on November the 3rd because it was so frivolously bad that it had to be redone. So what happens if we get in that situation? So the point is it's delay tactics. But we talked enough about this. But guys, whether you agree with me or John on the severity of this, what part of the data showed that the ABC commentators were right? 0%. I've presented nothing but facts so far. This isn't, and then I've told you when it's my opinion.
There is flatly no evidence to suggest that there's anything wrong or fraudulent with mail-in balloting.
But let's move on. The polls, another thing that's very contentious. Now, we've got a situation where these, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is my understanding of the so-called swing states in this election. So you guys can see this. We've got North Carolina, we've got Arizona, Wisconsin, Iowa, Ohio, Michigan, Florida, and Pennsylvania. Now, these are the states that have been showed where 7 out of 8 of these swing states are not for Trump, they're for Biden. And for those of you that don't understand swing states, it's very similar to Australia with swing seats, where it's a seat that's contested by both parties, and they know that it's probably it could flip either side. Help me navigate this, John. What's going on here? I'm very confused why these are the swing states, because if you look at who won them in 2016, Trump won all of them.
Yeah.
And what is this polling based on? Is there any credibility to it?
Well, look, we have to accept that polling has been around since, I think, the 1940s, okay? An enormous amount of effort has been put into perfecting the science of polling. It is quite extraordinary how these pollsters can foresee an election result almost always very accurately, okay? Now, they might be out 2 or 3%, okay, which can be very significant, 2 or 3%, but it's still quite amazing that they are smart enough to gauge an electorate all around the world and largely tell us what's going to happen. But of course, now look, the polls were not badly out in 2016, as the orthodoxy is that they were way out. And the orthodoxy is that they were way out in the 2019 federal election in this country. They were out by about 2 or 3% on both occasions, okay, which is not great, okay, but it's not like they were out by 6 or 7. Now, with those states that you've just shown, I have thought for some time that whoever wins Pennsylvania is going to be the next president of the United States.
Really?
Pennsylvania is the new Florida.
Yeah.
Because it's a big state. So Trump can afford to lose Michigan and Wisconsin, but if he keeps, and he can even lose Arizona, but if he keeps Pennsylvania, Florida and Ohio, I think, should be fine. Iowa should be fine for Trump. North Carolina should be fine. So I think Pennsylvania is the biggie, but Pennsylvania will sort of will tell us what's going to happen in Michigan and Wisconsin anyway, because that's the similar sort of part of the world.
Yeah.
But look, this is the interesting thing. If you look at those polls, the 3 big surprises on that glorious night on Election Day 2016.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin.
Yep.
No pollster, except for one, said that Trump was going to win it. And these places have been polled, 50 times. Okay.
Yeah.
One pollster said, just in the about 2 days before the election, Trump's going to win all 3.
Yeah.
And that was this guy called the Trafalgar Group.
Yep.
You familiar with the Trafalgar Group?
Yeah.
Okay. Now they are openly a Republican aligned firm, but they want to get their results right. And they said they came up with this novel approach in 2016. and when they ring up somebody, let's say they ring up Jack and Jill or somebody from outback Wisconsin, and they say, who are you going to vote for? And someone might say Biden. And then they say, the Trafalgar ask another question, which I think is very interesting innovation in polling. They said, the question is, how do you think most of your neighbours are going to vote? And then that person who just said Biden, there's a big jump up of about 10%. She might say Biden, but then she says, I think most of my neighbours are going to vote for Trump. And Trafalgar says, well, look, this is actually a way of trying to find out how many people out there are misleading voters about saying they are not going to vote for Trump, but in fact they do want to vote for Trump. This is what the whole election hinges on, because the polls are not great right now.
Yeah, they're not. They
weren't great in early October 2016. They were very bad then, and then they did narrow and got better and better till election day.
Yeah.
So I'm keeping a close eye on the Trafalgar Group. The Trafalgar Group is saying, they had a poll just about 3 hours ago, in Arizona, Trump's ahead about 4%.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, I did see that. Yeah, I did actually.
That's encouraging.
Yeah, it is.
And he's consistently saying, we're looking very good in all those states you just showed.
Yeah.
I think his most recent Pennsylvania poll, he was behind by about 1 or 2, but that's not much.
It's not much.
Particularly since late October was good for Trump last time. And the other thing about Pennsylvania is there's about 250,000 Amish. You're familiar with the Amish community in the United States, and I think about 70% of them live in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Now, these people do not have phones and do not have computers, and they traditionally don't vote.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, they love Donald Trump. Okay, so there's been these Amish, because they don't have cars; they have the old buggies.
Yeah, that's it.
And they've been having these Amish sort of, buggy runs for Trump. Now, I don't know how any pollster is polling those Amish who are going to turn out en masse for Donald Trump.
Yeah. Wow, that's going to be awesome.
Yes.
I have another example. Ohio is an example where Trump won it last year. And at the moment, he's polling 4 points ahead, which is very unusual. Democrats are stunned right now. The survey of over 1,000 people found that Trump was 47.6% versus Joe Biden's 43%. And this was very interesting because other polls have showed Biden ahead in that area.
Yeah.
But this poll done by Fox News found that in October, this was not, in October 2016, we had a very similar situation. Clinton was leading that state with 48 to 38, but then Trump went on to win it 51 to 43 against Clinton. So a very late poll in October in 2016, the month before the election, Clinton's polled 10 points ahead of Trump, yet Trump goes on to win it by 7-8 points. There's definitely skepticism there. And that's just one state. But anyway.
Look, that's very interesting data.
Yeah.
Particularly that poll in October 2016 showing Hillary was going to win it by 10. Now, polls, of course, can be out. Look, it feels as though, so much of the mainstream media is just frothing at the mouth in their hatred of Donald Trump. And it seemed they seem to be playing exactly the same thing they were doing 4 years ago, where they think the more we can just tell people that Trump's going to lose by a landslide, the more we can shove it down their throats, the more likely it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, it could easily be backfiring.
Yeah.
But the question is, are the people running these polls being scientific or are they being partisan? I think that probably the reality is they're probably trying to be scientific. I don't think they're trying to be partisan. I mean, the Fox News poll, Fox News is generally pro-Trump. The Fox News poll is one of the worst for Trump. It was in 2016 and it is now. And the LA Times, which is not the Los Angeles Times, which is not a friendly newspaper to Trump, all through 2016, the LA Times poll said Trump was going to win. So, look, I think the polling companies are a bit sort of all over the place. Look, but when we can be dismissive of polls, we like to think after Brexit and Scott Morrison's victory and Trump 4 years ago. Yeah. But I will we need to put on the record as well, the polling at the congressional elections in 2018 understated the Democratic support just a little bit.
Okay.
So in all those other examples, Morrison, Brexit, Trump 16, all understated the Conservative vote.
Yeah.
But at the congressional election, and so that's why people think there's this shy Tory voter, this shy Trump voter, because people are reluctant to admit they want to vote for the right because there's violence and intimidation going on. But that was not the case at the congressional elections. But really, Trump wasn't so much on the ballot in 2018 in the congressional elections. So
yeah, we could talk about this all day, and I love the knowledge that you're bringing to this because you know about the demographics there. Like, find me another Australian that has that demonstration of intelligence on the topic. It's phenomenal. I'll finish on this very last topic because I know we're running out of time, but just to finish on polls, I found a new poll which actually they were trying to work out how to work out the secret Trump voter and how they're going to vote. And what happened was they came out and they pretty much said that they found, and look, I'll include this in the link, guys, but I'm covering this very roughly. They found that 10% of Trump voters weren't sort of presenting their opinions in polls. 10% of intermediary middle America sort of voters aren't doing it, and 5% of progressives aren't voting that way. And we know that progressives are the only ones that are comfortable airing their opinions on these issues from past conversations I've had. So I seriously think it's being understated. And if you take into consideration that data, you find that the national polls, if you take into consideration, Trump ends up being ahead by 2 points.
Right.
And that's where I'm like, guys, I think they're wrong on this. I don't think... Look, the polls, you're right, they were slightly wrong in 2016 and they got the popular vote right. But I seriously think that there's an issue with... They haven't fixed this issue. How do they reach non-college educated white males? And that's one of the things they understated. But let's move on. We could talk about that all day. Do you think Trump will win?
Well, 2 months ago, I was 90% sure he would win. And I would say now I would be 70% sure he would win. And that is based on we've discussed the polls, and we're in agreement that the polls are... Look, there's a lot of polling, but when we factor in these other issues about the battleground states and the shy Trump voter and other things, I think the polling is not great for Trump, but it's, we're competitive. Then the second issue is the enthusiasm levels for Trump. Now, in Australia, enthusiasm levels is not a big deal because we're all forced to vote. Our freedom is taken away. But anyway, in America, it's a voluntary voting, which is what it should be, and enthusiasm in any voluntary voting situation is obviously critical. Well, anyone who follows social media has seen this eruption of Trump events, not organised by the Trump campaign, just citizens who love Trump, going on a tractor ride, a boat ride, a car ride, and there's endless people. There's a lot of love for Trump. Michael Moore, one of the, a smart guy, hard left, a Bernie Sanders lefty. He did say Trump, he said very emphatically Trump's going to win 4 years ago. And he said about 3 weeks ago, he said, are we all ready for Trump to win again? Because you better be. He said the Trump enthusiasm level is off the charts. Okay, so that's an important thing. And then the third indicator about an election is the historical precedents. There are patterns in elections. One of the strongest patterns in the great English-speaking democracies like America and Australia and others is that first-term national governments get a second term, with very few exceptions. So in Australia, every first-term government has been re-elected since 1931. We had a one-term Labor government in 1931, and it was a complete schmozzle, and they lost badly after one term. But everybody else gets a second term. Now, it's often hard to win that second term. So John Howard lost the popular vote to Kim Beazley in 1998. Julia Gillard almost lost in 2010 to Tony Abbott, but she just scraped over. We saw it last year with Justin Trudeau in Canada. He was trying to go for his second term, and he got there. It was tight, but he got there.
Wow.
Now in the United States, every president who was a fresh president in terms of not being the vice president of the previous president or something like that. So it's a brand new presidency with a brand new party. Every time someone's been in that situation since the 1890s, they've got re-elected, except for one exception. It was Jimmy Carter. In 1976, Jimmy Carter defeated a Republican. In 1980, he got defeated by a Republican. And I think that, well, Jimmy Carter was pretty useless and the economy was bad and he had Iran and other things. But he was up against a godlike candidate called Ronald Reagan, you know. So, so the precedent is strongly on Trump's side. But there's exceptions. And people, when I say to people about that precedent, people say, oh, well, you know, Trump's not a normal candidate. And I say, well, look, people always think that, but they are right. Trump is obviously an unusual candidate. So maybe the precedent doesn't apply to him, but I think normally it does. So just going back, the historical precedent says Trump's going to win. Overwhelmingly says Trump's going to win. Enthusiasm says Trump's going to win overwhelmingly. The polls, which is probably the most important indicator, is not great, but it's not a write-off. So I think... and the polls 4 years ago in mid to late October did recover strongly for Trump. So let's see if that's going to happen again. Okay, so is he going to win? Look, I would probably be, after just listening to myself for the last 3 minutes, Joel, I'd probably say I'm back up to about 75% sure he's going to win.
You convinced yourself. That's
right,
that's rare. Right. You should talk to the mirror a little bit more often.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Totally. I said it last year. I said it to a mutual friend of mine, Ricardo Bossi. I said the only thing in Trump's way, this is a year ago, is the economy. And because I knew it was going to blow up, I just didn't know if it was going to happen before or after the election.
Right.
The coronavirus dove on that grenade and detonated it so that Trump is no longer responsible for that. Now, whether it's his fault or not, I don't know. I just know that the national debt needs to be addressed.
Oh, yeah.
However, polls universally show this, that Trump is trusted more in the economy. And, you know, just like the Clintons saying, it's the economy, stupid, that's what people vote on. I think that, look, that's a very interesting indicator, the historical one. I mean, we all know that they typically win their second 4 years, but but that was a very fascinating global thing. Of course, you looked at the Canada elections. No one's looked at it except you're literally the only other person that's looked at it other than myself. And that's amazing. Not even the US commentators look at it. Okay, let's assume Trump wins or Biden wins. Will there be a peaceful transfer from the incoming administration or vice versa?
Yeah, look, regardless of the result, I do not believe that there will be violence.
Okay.
I mean, even in Florida, which was a very heated situation in 2000, and which went on for about 6 or 7 weeks, there wasn't really any street clashes. There were a little bit of pushing and shoving down in Miami-Dade.
Yeah.
But there wasn't an exchange of gunfire.
Yeah.
It wasn't like there was the Republicans over there shooting at the Democrats and vice versa.
Yeah.
So I don't like this talk about there being not a peaceful transfer. Yes, of course there'll be a peaceful transfer. I think the chances of us having a result on election day is very likely.
Yeah.
People keep saying it's going to get dragged out and it's, we won't know who's going to win. I think it'll be over, and I think it'll all be fine. Now, look. Let's say I'm wrong. How could this not be the case? Well, let's say it is a really, really, really close election, and let's say we don't have one Florida 2000. Let's say we've got 7 of them. Let's say we've got 7 states where there's massive disputes going on, and legal challenges and street violence turns into scuffles, turns into gunshots. Okay. I think it wouldn't take long for that situation to calm down very quickly. People would be shocked by it. And so I think it's just this talk of civil war as being a non-peaceful transfer. I just can't see how that could happen in the real world. And I think that it's irresponsible, and I think it's largely coming from the Democrats because they're wanting to create a sense of crisis around Trump. That's what they're wanting to create, a sense of, he's an authoritarian, and he's, and there's just chaos always around him. That's where I think this is coming from.
Do they realise that fear generally, I mean, they taught me this, that fear generally helps the Conservative candidate?
Yeah, right. Good point, yeah.
No, look, I do disagree. I think there's going to be some significant... If it was... Look, I think we might both agree on this, actually. If it was going to happen, it's going to happen this election. I mean, never have we seen such an establishment in the intelligence agencies. I mean, look at the last 4 years, what's happened. Or even look at Brexit. 4 years to get anything done on that. That was a phenomenal debacle. A vote was had. It was done. That was meant to be it. Yet they had to have 2 more votes. They had a vote for the MEPs, where the Brexit party won overwhelmingly, pretty much all the seats. And then we had a situation where they had to, once again, win an 80-seat majority. And still they're having issues. I don't know. It might not be civil war, but what's the definition of civil war? Not necessarily shooting in the streets, but maybe it's an incoming administration having problems with the past administration, as the past administration spies on them, or leaves landmines.
Yeah. Well, there's been massive harassment against Trump. The Democrats did not accept the result of the last election. One of the pillars of democracy is the concept of the loser's consent. The loser of an election needs to wish the winner of an election all the best, and to say, well, the people didn't choose me, but the more important than me is the country. The Democrats did not have that attitude at the last election, and so they've just been undermining Trump from the very, very beginning, and it's been shocking. And it's going to, at some point, there will be a backlash against it. Yeah, and last few thoughts, but let's not forget Hillary Clinton's, what she said at the DNC. She said, under no circumstances should Joe Biden concede. That's right. That's a big call. Even if he loses big time, that's a big call. And also... That just tells us what's in Hillary's heart. Exactly. She is a political extremist. Yeah. I'm not saying an ideological extremist, but she's a political extremist. When she said that, she said, no matter what happens, Joe, never concede. Exactly. Never concede. And then she's got her campaign manager from 2016 in the background saying, yeah. These people are wild people. They're dangerous people. Yeah. And I thought that was appalling what Hillary Clinton said, but at least it was very honest. Yeah, and he was honest. And also John Podesta with the war games that happened, where he suggested that the western states like California should secede from the Union in the event that there's a Trump victory, or on paper, predicting. You should look at these war games. I reference it in my article. It's very fascinating how they sat down for retired governors of the Republican side and the Democrat side. A lot of rhinos among the Republicans in name only. They came out and they said, but did these war games, and in every situation they war gamed it of the different outcomes of the election. They found violence would break out in the streets, and John Podesta played Joe Biden in that situation, and it didn't look great. I hope I'm wrong. I'm not here for the popcorn and the views. I'm here to learn some lessons from my own country. But I'm very worried. Do you watch TV shows? I know it's a strange question. If I'm watching TV, I'm usually watching the news. Okay, see, I'm the same, because there is no TV show larger than this one. That's right. You know what I mean? Right. And I said this to a mutual friend, Ross Cameron, Roscoe, and I said to him, Ross, you don't watch TV shows, does he? And he's like, no, I don't. I was like, I think I know why that is, and it's because you watch. I play video games. I when I have time, and I watch TV shows that are larger than life. Find me something that's larger than life here. Not even how House of Cards is as large as this in the storyline. So I thought that would be interesting. If you're into politics just for the theatre, what you're saying is there is no better theatre than US presidential politics. No question about it. Okay. Yeah. But of course it has real world consequences. And so we're interested in it. We want politics to be a means of delivering a better world for the next generation. Yeah. John, did you have any last comments before I wrap this up? Well, look, I just wanted to... thanks very much for having me, Joel. I've enjoyed your podcast in the past, so I'm honoured to be here. Well, look, hopefully we can see you at CPAC, and hopefully everybody can come down there. Look, I guess my last thoughts would be this. We have to... Let's imagine that Trump does not win, which could happen. Now, I think the Republicans have got to resist doing what the Democrats did 4 years ago and not accept the result. We've got to say, okay, the American people have chosen Joe Biden. We've got to wish him well. Yeah. You know, we've got to prove to the American people that we're not the power-hungry rats that the Democrats are. We're going to say, and look, when Obama won, okay, they were, basically the Republicans were very, very polite to him for his 8 years, okay? And, you know, because on balance, the people on the right are nicer people than people on the left. And so, not just in their politics, but just sort of in their general manner. And so this is why we were basically, you know, polite enough to Obama. We didn't try to impeach him. We didn't invent one fake scandal every 3 days. Yeah. Now, but then what will happen to the Republican Party if Trump loses? Well, you know, people are saying that the 2020 US presidential election is the most important since Abraham Lincoln. Probably is. But I've got a feeling the 2024 election is going to be more important. Yeah. Because that's going to tell us, was Trump an aberration or a new path for the Republican Party? So if they just go back to their normal old Mitt Romney, John McCain type candidate, it means Trump was an aberration. If they go for, and hopefully it'll be, Trump will be into his second term and he'll have a big say on who the next Republican candidate's going to be. But I think the next win, lose or draw this time for Trump, I think the 2024 Republican candidate will be somebody who's pro-Trump and who probably Trump endorses.
Yeah, I totally agree. 2024 will be more important than 2020.
Yeah.
And I think that in the event that Trump wins, we're going to see the destruction of the Democratic establishment once and for all. I used to be progressive. The progressives will never forgive what's happened. They will rebuild the Democratic Party in their own image, and this will be Trump will destroy the Democratic Party, but the progressives will finish it off root and stem and rebuild it. And that is why 2024 will be more important, because they will come back with a vengeance, more radical, and I suspect they will tone down the rhetoric a bit, so they'll be a bit more palatable, which will be fascinating, because the media companies, they will hold on, but they're going to be gone. That's in 4 years. Trump will go after the Hillary Clintons of the Democratic Party and the Nancy Pelosi's. However, if Trump loses, I've got a much more dire view of, you know, I'm a very young guy. I'm meant to be optimistic all the time. Not in this case. I genuinely think that, I'm not saying there should be violence, but I'm saying that I can't see a world where Australia won, but also America is in a situation where they will be significantly, you know, things will get much, much worse than they are right now. And I mean, just on the one topic of China and the protection the US provides for us and allows for us to operate and, you know, make mistakes, it'll be, there's no coming back. I think 4 more years, the amount of lost ground we'll have will be phenomenal. But, I mean, unless, I don't want to have the last say on that. But, okay. But that, look, those are my thoughts. So, I mean, this is, yeah, you're right. This is the most important election since perhaps Abraham Lincoln. But John, this has been an absolute pleasure.
Very good, Joel. Thank you for having me.
In terms of the amount of people I can talk about this on and that know the demographics of the US, there's no one. There's literally no one in Australia. Okay. So I really appreciate you coming in. But look, guys, I'm going to be chucking this up very soon on Monday. I really hope you guys enjoy the conversation. Leave a comment for John, and please, the more likes I get on this, the more steps I'm going to get John on Facebook, because I know he does a phenomenal job on Twitter, but none of you guys are on Twitter. So we're going to get John on Facebook, and who knows, maybe we might do more of these as future US elections go forward. But John, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you very much.
And I'll see you guys next week.